Welcome back, GED scholars, to another Reasoning Through Language Arts exam lesson. And in this video, we are going to talk about noun-verb agreements. In a separate video, we talked about word usage, we covered what homonyms are, and then we covered the 8 parts of speech. And in that video, we covered what a noun, verb, adjective, adverb, pronoun, article, preposition, and interjection. We focused a lot on making sure that you understood that on this RLA exam, you're being graded with your knowledge and your skill when it comes to American English language. So we talked about how you have to make sure that on this exam, you pay attention to the noun. And when you introduce a pronoun, the pronoun matches that noun. If you are unfamiliar with the 8 parts of speech, please make sure you watch that video, not only to take care of the multiple choice section of the exam, but also when it comes to the extended writing response, which is the essay you will need to write for the exam. As I mentioned in this video, we are going to cover subject-verb agreements because on the exam, the multiple choice section, you will be asked to correct subject-verb agreement errors. You will read a small paragraph and you will notice that there is a sentence, there is word missing, and so there'll be a blank. And when you get to the multiple choice section, you need to choose the correct answer, and it might be the same verb, but in different tenses in order to answer the question correctly. In this video, folks, as you can see from this list, it's kind of a long video. So I'm going to make sure that the sections are marked because if you're like, hey, I already understand verb tenses and forms, but I really need help with irregular verbs or compound subjects, whatever it might be, you can just skip to that part of the video. As I always mention, folks, once you learn a skill, that's not it. You need to make sure that you go online. You're searching for other material, other videos, anywhere where you can find worksheets where you can practice these skills is key. Let's talk about verbs. As you saw in the last video, we talked about the 8 parts of speech and verbs was part of it. We even talked how you can have a sentence that has a noun and a verb, and as long as they agree, that's a perfectly good, simple sentence. However, when it comes to the RLA exam in the multiple choice section, you're not going to be asked what is the present participle version of this verb. Instead, they're going to give you a sentence and they're either going to leave the verb out or they're going to give you the incorrect one. And then when you get to the question, you need to figure out which one of the multiple choice answers is the correct verb form for that sentence. Verbs come in 3 forms. So we have the present, which is this top one up here. We have present participle that we see right in the middle, and then past or past participle, which we see on the bottom row. So when you look at the example we're using here, which is the verb walk, for present tense, the form of the verb could be just that base, what we see right here with walk, or you can add an S to it, and that would give you walks. Which if you come on over all the way to the right where it says how to write the form, you're going to use the S when it comes to pronouns or even proper nouns. But the pronouns he, she, and it, that's what you're going to do. You're going to add an S to the base form of that verb. When we go down to this middle row right here, we see that, well, another thing you can do to that verb is you can add an ing. And when we add ing to our verb, the tense we're creating is the present participle. Once again, folks, don't worry so much about the names of these. This isn't what you're going to be tested on. You're going to be tested on whether you know that within the sentence that you're reading, in that context, which one of these endings do you need to have for that verb? The third form we see right here in that bottom row is you can add an ed. So when you add an ed, the tense of that verb is going to be in the past or it's going to be the past participle. So those are the 3 forms. And I want to make sure you pay attention to the form, folks. And what happens is when we have these forms, it's giving us the tense. And down here, as you can read, verb tenses show time relationships. And so we have our simple tense, we have our progressive tense, and we have perfect tense. So first up, let's talk about simple tenses and the form of the regular verbs. And if you're like, why is she mentioning regular verbs? Because folks, if you didn't know, there are irregular verbs, and those irregular verbs have some interesting forms, but we'll take a look at that a little bit later. So with this first group, being the simple tense, we're going to see, we obviously know every verb has 3 forms. And so this first set is going to look at the simple tenses. And remember, folks, when you hear or you see this word tenses, it's talking about a time relationship. So when we come down here for the first one where we see past tense. This word past is letting us know that this action happened, not right now, not in the future, but in the past. So it gives the reader or the person listening an idea of when that action took place. So for the past tense, it reads its completed action or past state of being. Remember, a verb is an action or a state of being. And then down here next to the form, we already know this because we saw it on the last slide. But when it's the past tense of a regular verb in the simple family, all you're going to do is add an ed, or you're going to add a d if the verb ends with an e. So let's go ahead and look at our example here. And I have a timeline drawn out for you so you get an idea of what happens when we are using verbs that end in ed. So the example reads, George walked to school. And you'll notice that I have a red X over here on my timeline because this ending, this ED, is letting me know that, hey, as far as time is concerned, this didn't happen now. It's not going to happen in the future, but it happened in the past. So if I'm reading this, I have an idea, okay, well, it's something that could have happened yesterday, and it happened yesterday, and it was done with it. There's no progressive ending like an ing that would make me think that this action is going to take place in the present and in the future. So when you see the ed ending, folks, it's letting the reader know that the action took place in the past. Next up, we see present tense. So present tense reads that it's repeated action or state of being. And so when we look at our example, notice that on the timeline, I have just X's across the whole timeline. You don't know when it started, and you don't know when it's going to end. All you know that currently the action is taking place. So with our example here, we read, George walks to school. Once again, I don't know when it started based on this sentence alone, and I don't know when it's going to stop. So the present tense is going to be the concept of it's a repeated action until somebody says that that verb stopped, that action stopped. Next up, we have future tense. And the future tense is action or state of being that will happen. And I want you to pay attention to the form, this yellow box next to form, because it has the plus sign and it says will before base form. For future form, folks, you need to add this word. It's a helping verb, will, before the verb itself. And it's going to just be the verb. Like there's no ending to it, all because this helping verb is going to let the reader know that this action hasn't happened yet. It didn't happen in the past. It's not happening presently, but it will happen in the future. So let's look at our example. We have George will walk to school. And notice that the action on our timeline is in the future, not happening present, not happening in the past. How does the reader know this? Because of the use of the word will, the helping verb will, and the fact that my verb is just the base form of the verb, walk. I didn't add an ed the way we do up here when we're talking about a past action. I didn't add an s to it down here the way that we were talking about with the present and the use of the verb with a proper pronoun. But what we did down here is, yes, we use the base form, but we attach the helping verb will. And that's what you need to make sure you pay attention to. So definitely for the simple tenses, folks, just make sure you know, okay, there are 3 forms, past, present, and future. And it's this simple stuff. It's things that I already kind of know. Hopefully you're saying that to yourself. But if you're like, this is all new to me, please make sure, take a screenshot, study this information so you have a better understanding of the simple tenses and their forms for regular verbs. So next up is the progressive family of tenses and their forms for regular verbs. And so when you read this word progressive, I hope you're thinking of, okay, progressive means that it's continuing, there's growth, there's movement forward. That's what I want you to start thinking of when you see this progressive tense, or when you're studying progressive tenses, or even during this lesson, because I want you to get an understanding that when we use progressive tenses, the action is ongoing. It's not like it's a clean cut, the action started, the action ended. When I teach this to my students, I tell them, like I'll like wipe my hands and, say like, hey, the action ended. Not with the progressive tense. So let's look at the 3 forms to get a better understanding. So first up, we see up here past progressive, and it's an ongoing action that occurred in the past. And what you'll see below it is not the form of the verb, but what you see in these yellow boxes, these are helping verbs. And so when you see was or were and then a verb, you know automatically you have a past progressive tense. So when we look at past progressive, we know it's ongoing, and we're going to make sure we pay attention to the fact that there are two helping verbs, was and were. So let's look at our example. So the sentence read, George was walking to school. Notice that there is an arrow that's letting you know that, hey, his action started at one point and it continued on a little bit more, but by the time it continued on, there was an ending to it. So that's how we know that this happened in the past, is because yes, it started in the past, but it also ended in the past. We also see the use of the word was, and then we have our verb that ends in ing. Because remember, you guys, this is the progressive family, the progressive tenses. So all of the endings for past, present, and future will have an ing. The way we can differentiate past progressive, present progressive, future progressive is with these helping verbs that you see once again in these yellow boxes. So let's review now present progressive. So it's an action in progress and it's ongoing. So that means that it's started in the present now and it's still happening. It hasn't ended yet. So when we look at our example, notice the arrow starts in the present. And even though we're coming over here somewhat into the future, we don't know for a fact that the action has ended the way we know it ended in the past tense. So the sentence read, George is walking, ends in ing. Remember, your progressive family ends in ing. They're always moving ahead. They're inging, as I would say to my students. And then let's look at the helping verbs. We have the state of being in the present tense, am, is, are. George is walking to school. That is present progressive. We know it started. We don't know when it's going to end. And therefore, the action is progressive until they say he's done walking. He's reached his destination. Now let's look at future progressive tense. Future progressive, ongoing action that will occur in the future. Notice the helping verb will be, to let the reader know that this action is going to happen in the future. It'll start somewhere. It'll, take place over however much time, and then it'll end. So our example reads, George will be walking to school. We see the helping verbs right here. And what happens with my verb? It ends in an ing because the progressive family ends in ing. And last but not least, let's review the perfect tenses and forms. So folks, just the same way the progressive family, that verb ended in ing and it had all of those helping verbs with it. Same concept when we get to the perfect tenses, but notice that they have different helping verbs. But I want you to pay attention to the fact that the verb itself will end in an ed, whether it's past perfect tense, present perfect tense, and even future perfect tense. So the helping verbs are different than what we saw with the progressive family, because remember, progressive is like, hey, it's always happening. I'm inging it, I'm inging it. So that's how they think. The perfect tense, though, is thinking more of a completed action. So let's look at the first one to get a better understanding. So the first one is the past progressive tense, and it's an action that was completed before or by a specific time in the past. This is really important, folks. I want you to pay attention to this because when you read sentences like the one we have, George had walked to school before the weather got hot. This is telling me exact timing. And when I get exact timing like this, I know that I'm going to be dealing with a past perfect tense, especially when I see the helping verb had right before my main verb walked, which, as I said, for perfect tenses and forms, the perfect family, each one of my tenses is going to end in an ed. Different helping verb, but will end in an ed. So this first sentence is telling me, hey, it's before the weather got hot. So we know that the weather got hot at this time. Let's say, for example, 9 a.m. George walked to school. He began and he ended before this weather got hot, before the sun that you see on your timeline right here. So when we know the specific time in the past, we can make sure that it has the helping verb had, ends in an ed. You know you have a past perfect tense. So let's go to the next one. Present perfect tense, an action began in the past and continues until now. So when I look at my timeline and I look at my sentence, what do I have? I have George has walked to school, because what are my helping verbs? They're down here. I have has for singular, have for plural. So George has walked to school. This present perfect is letting me know that the action started in the past, but it was completed in the present moment. Last but not least, we have the future perfect tense. Future perfect tense reads, an action will be completed by a specific time in the future. Once again, folks, when we're seeing the specific time, just the way we saw up here with past perfect tense, we know that the sentence is going to give us more information about this time. Because look at our example. George will have walked to school before the end of the morning. So if we know the end of the morning is 11:59 a.m., we know that he will have arrived to school by that time. We don't know when he'll start, but we know that definitely by this time that they're telling us in the sentence, that's when the action will have ended. And notice the helping verbs for the future perfect will have. George will have walked to school before the end of the morning. So folks, we have our simple tense, we had the progressive tense, and now we're looking at perfect tense. Once again, don't worry so much about the title as much as you need to worry about how does my main verb end and what are the helping verbs that can let me know which one of these tenses I'm dealing with. So hopefully for number one, you chose letter C, had seized. And for number two, you chose A, closed. So let's look at why number one was C, which is had seized. Well, the sentence read, by the 1950s, Ellis Island, and then it went on, we chose had seized to be an important immigration checkpoint. What I want you to pay attention to is exactly right here, what I've circled in yellow is the by the 1950s. Because if you were to go back in the video where we talked about the perfect tense, remember the perfect tense, all of those verbs are going to end in an ed, and I went ahead and circled that in the sentence. So all of the perfect family, past, present, and future, the verb ends in ed. But more importantly, what we know about past perfect tense is that it's an action that was completed before or by a specific time. Look at our sentence. By the 1950s, like that is your flag letting you know we have the by a specific period of time already checked off on our list, and we know that this is happening in the past, so we can then say it's giving us the specific time that something happened by. We know, okay, out of my answer choices, I need to make sure that it is a past tense, so already your mind should be at the verb should be an ed. But then it should also go to, oh, I remember past perfect tense has a helping verb, and that helping verb is had. And so, once again, folks, you don't need to so much remember the names of the tenses. Like, you don't need to know it's past perfect tense. You just need to know that whenever you read a sentence and there is a date that they are saying this, whatever the subject is, this happened by this date, you know in your mind, okay, this signals the use of the helping verb had, and then my verb needs to be ending in the ed. For number two, the government closed Ellis Island to immigration in 1954. It's being very specific and it's saying, hey, it happened in this year. We don't know when during this year. We just know that the action of it closing happened this time. And for that reason, you're going to use the simple past tense of just closed. Next up is irregular verbs. And the thing with irregular verbs, folks, is that don't follow a pattern like most verbs do when it comes to their past participle forms. So when it comes to these irregular verbs, what you're going to end up needing to do is basically find a list that has common irregular verbs and study it. And like always, folks, please use technology wisely. I came over to Google, like we saw earlier. I searched verb forms and tenses for GED. I'm going to click on the More button again to show you there are tools you can use online if you can't, for some reason, purchase a study guide, or if you're like, I really don't trust the internet. What if they give me incorrect verb forms? For the Kaplan book that's being shared with you, they have the irregular verbs. And once again, they give you a great little lesson about it. And they have a list of common irregular verbs. So if you're like, I would rather trust this company than anything else on the internet, please make sure you wisely use this tool to help you out. So first up, for subject verb agreement, we're going to talk about the simple present tense and the subject verb agreements. And the rule is, folks, is that when you have a singular subject, you have a singular verb. When you have a plural subject, you have a plural verb. And so we saw that when we were going over the simple present tense. When we have the present tense, I, you, we, they use the base form of the verb. And then he, she, it, or if you were to introduce a proper name, like we used George for our example, you would add an S or an ES to the base form. So when we look at these examples down here, we see that we have the pronoun I and then the verb brush. And notice, because it's the pronoun I, the verb is just the simple verb that we use in that present tense, brush. So I brushed my hair in the morning. Versus when we come down here and we have the pronoun she, like it shares up here in this table, we're going to add an ES to the base form of the verb brush. So she brushes her hair in the morning. And then as you can see from these other examples, we're introducing that proper noun, Carla. And this acts the same way as he, she, it. We're going to add that ES. And it continues on with all of the other examples that you see. And so the simple present tense is going to be common when you're writing your extended writing response, that essay. So you want to make sure that you know the rule, and it's going to be the rule for all of the tenses. That simple present tense, folks, you got to make sure you follow that rule. Singular with singular and plural with plural. So let's talk about simple past tense and subject verb agreements. And folks, if you haven't read it yet, read this top bullet point. We're going to actually read it together. The simple past tense is easier because the past tense verb stays the same. Yay! Yes, folks, the simple past tense will end in the ed, but that verb is the same whether it's singular, like we see here with the first two examples. I brushed my hair in the morning. She brushed her hair in the morning. Or when we come over here on the right column, Mark and Joe brushed their hair in the morning. They brushed. So take a breather, folks, because the simple past tense, it ends in an ed. That verb ends in an ed. And the subject verb agreement, you don't need to think too hard about it, because no matter what, whether the subject is singular or plural, that verb will end in an ed. When we go over to the progressive and perfect tenses, folks, the subjects and the helping verbs must agree in number. Remember, the progressive and the perfect family are the ones that give us the helping verb, and then we are to either add the ing if you're in the progressive family, or you add an ed to the end of that verb if you're in that perfect family. So that's one thing I definitely want you to remember. When you see these helping verbs, was, were, am, is, are, will be, and then the verb after it ends in an ing, you have a progressive family verb. Versus if you see had, has, have, will have, followed by the verb that ends in ed, you know that you have one of these perfect family tenses. And so it's important that if your subject is a singular subject, like I, he, she, it, you're going to want to use that singular helping verb. And the singular verb is going to be on the left. Was is singular, were is plural. Same thing with am and is. Those are both singular. Are is going to be plural. Will be, it can be used with both singular and plural. We come over to the perfect family. Had, singular or plural. They had, it had, she had. The present perfect tense, has or have, singular for has, have is plural, even though you will use it with the pronouns I and you. This is where, some folks are like, oh, it's tricky. It's not tricky. It's just, this is kind of like an exception, a unique exception where you have to be mindful of the fact that have is meant to be used with plural subjects, unless you're using the pronouns I or you, which you're going to use have. Collective nouns are words that in your mind you think of as plural, but the noun itself is singular. These are the type of nouns that I want you to definitely pay attention to and think about them as that collective noun, where, yes, in your mind, you see a whole bunch of people or a whole bunch of items. But when it comes to American English grammar, the noun itself is a singular noun. Next up, the indefinite pronouns. So, indefinite pronouns do not refer to a specific person. So, as you can see from the list, we have singular, plural, or both. So, these both, what it's basically saying is it could imply that you're talking about something that is either singular or plural, and it's basically up to the rest of the sentence to let the reader know which one you're talking about. So, if you can see from this example, it says, these days it seems as if everyone is quitting the gym, because when we come up here, we notice that everyone is singular. And that kind of makes sense, folks, because for anyone, everyone, someone, there's one right here. It's ending in that one. So in your mind, I want you to think about those words. When you hear any one, think about one person. That is singular. Every one, someone, that is singular. And then even when it comes to any body, think about the body part of it. There's only one body. It doesn't say any bodies. It says any body. So body, you should be thinking one and think about it as that singular. Next example reads, most of the crew is quitting the gym. Why are we using is? First and foremost, what we're talking about right now, indefinite pronouns, the use of most. And you can see from the table up here, most is in the both section. It could be singular or plural. But then what we did is then we introduced the crew. And crew, folks, is one of our collective nouns. You think of crew, it's more than a couple of people, right? Crew, yes, we think of as plural, but the word itself is a collective noun, which means it is singular. And for that reason, we are using the singular form of the verb and we're using is. And so we're using the singular form of the verb is to go along with our progressive verb that ends in an ing. So yes, we are using most, which can be both singular or plural, but the introduction of the collective noun crew lets us know that our verb has to be singular. The last example, most of the people are quitting the gym. So if you're thinking, oh, okay, so they're using most, it could be either singular or plural, and you look at people and you're thinking it's a collective noun. People is not a collective noun. It is not a noun that is supposed to be considered a singular noun. It is a plural noun, and that's why we see over here that our helping verb is the plural are, and then we have quitting that ends in ing. But folks, people is plural. So when it comes to compound subjects, and folks, we've been talking a lot using these sentences where there is only one subject, but when you have compound subjects, the rule is going to be determined by whether or not you're using the coordinating conjunction and or one of the other ones. You're like, what's a coordinating conjunction? Folks, coordinating conjunction, the acronym is FANBOYS. Each one stands for one of the coordinating conjunctions. So we have for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so definitely I need you to make sure you look up coordinating conjunctions online if you don't know them already, and you need to become familiar with them, folks. Coordinating conjunctions too will help you a lot when it comes to rules about punctuation, especially the comma. When you have two or more subjects and they're joined by that coordinating conjunction and, the compound subject is plural. So our sentence reads, Mary, yes, I know one person, and Joan, yes, I know one person. But use of the word and brings them together, makes it plural. So then we use a plural verb. Mary and Joan are having dinner with Mindy. When your compound subjects are joined by the coordinating conjunction or, the verb agrees with the subject closer to it. So for example, we have that same sentence, Mary or Joan is having dinner with Mindy. Because we're using this coordinating conjunction or, you're basically saying, hey, these folks, we're not bringing them together like and does. We're keeping them separate. And because they're separate, the verb that follows the one closest to it is going to be singular. That's why we see is instead of are. But as we can see with the verb that follows it, it too ends in an ing because it is part of that progressive family of tenses. If the subjects are joined by either or neither nor, the verb agrees with the subject closer to it. So same concept with if it's just one of the coordinating conjunctions or, It doesn't matter if it's this phrase here, either or if it's this phrase here, neither nor. Let's look at our example. Either Mary or Joan is having dinner with Mindy, which we knew, folks, because we see or. Even if you're like, I didn't know anything about this word either, you saw or, automatically you should be thinking in your mind, okay, these folks, they're separate. We're considering them to be their own individual by using this coordinating conjunction. So my verb is singular. Same thing with the other phrase. Neither Mary nor, and nor, folks, you can already see the or is already in there, nor Joe is having dinner with Mindy. So same concepts. When you see coordinating conjunction or, you see the coordinating phrase either or, neither nor, you know that the verb is going to be in line with whatever subject is closest to it. And folks, before you end the video and you go along and you practice the skills that you've learned, I want you to be careful of interrupters and the inverted structure. So when I'm talking about interrupters is when you have a group of words that interrupts the subject and its verb. So this first example we see Mary, who is a great friend, is having dinner with Mindy. So it's kind of like the writer was on this journey with you to tell you about Mary. They sidestepped to tell you that she's a great friend, and then they brought you back by finishing up by saying is having dinner with Mindy. Notice that these interrupters aren't necessary to have as the sentence. Like if we were to remove this interrupter and we just had Mary is having dinner with Mindy, perfectly good sentence, folks. There's nothing wrong with it. When you see writers who use interrupters, they're basically saying, I want to add some side information to this sentence. It has nothing to do with the sentence. I could have left it out, but as the writer, I just wanted to give you some more information. Notice too, the interrupters have a comma on both sides of them. So just think, okay, you're on a path, you stepped off the path to share some more information, but you got right back on. The thing I don't like about interrupters is that there is a cardinal sin of separating the subject, which is Mary, and the verb, which for us right here in this first one is the verb is. That's a cardinal sin. I'm not a fan of it. I know some great authors who love to use interrupters here and there. Not my cup of tea. It happens. There's nothing wrong with it. You just have to make sure you remember that your verb has to agree with the subject. The second example reads, the medicine prescribed by the doctor is on the table. So we see right here, prescribed by the doctor. This isn't an interrupter the way the first one is, where it's kind of like, I like completely stepped away from the fact that like the sentence is about her having dinner with Mindy, but I needed to tell you for some reason that she's a great friend. This that we see here, prescribed by the doctor, is related to the medicine itself. That's why you don't see the commas, because it's not a complete, I'm stepping off the path. It's just kind of like, hey, I tilted my head a little bit to the side to let you know that the medicine prescribed by the doctor is on the table. And once again, folks, the subject is medicine. Okay, it's not the doctor, it's medicine. So my whole thing about don't separate the subject from the verb, this is doing the same thing by saying prescribed by the doctor. You could take this out, the whole prescribed by the doctor, and the sentence is perfectly fine by itself. The medicine is on the table. And some folks would even say, well, of course, we know that medicine is prescribed by a doctor. So why would you even write that there? Once again, folks, it's a good sentence. It's perfectly fine, except that there is this interrupter separating the subject, medicine, from its verb, is. Next up, let's look at inverted structure. So be careful of sentences that have an inverted structure, which means the verb comes before the noun. So we see this a lot in questions. So obviously it's not a bad thing. It's not incorrect. I just need you to be aware of this too, because it doesn't matter if you're stating a sentence, if you're writing a sentence, or you're asking a question, noun and verbs have to agree. Thanks for watching the video, folks, where we talked about noun-verb agreements. I know there was a lot that took place in this video. We talked about verb tenses and forms, irregular verbs, subject-verb agreements, collective nouns, indefinite pronouns, compound subjects, things to be careful of or to be aware of, and that you have a good understanding of when to use the verb tense, when to use singular versus plural, and then understanding that some nouns, like the collective nouns, are going to seem like it's going to be plural, but in reality, it's singular. So just make sure, folks, that you review the information. There is a worksheet on gedtalk.com on the RLA page. You can download it, practice, folks, as much as you possibly can. And once again, please make sure you purchase a GED study guide that can help you. It not only will give you the lessons, but it also gives you worksheets. Most of the guides have at least 2 pre-tests to help you practice as well. You know what you're doing, folks. You've got this. Keep your head up.